The desert evening carried a strange kind of stillness, the kind that made every heartbeat sound louder and every breath feel heavier. The last line of sunlight stretched across the wide plains, clinging to the sand as if it did not want to leave. Riders who traveled this land often said the desert had its own voice, whispering warnings or promises depending on who dared to listen. On that distant horizon, the air shimmered around a tall, broad-shouldered Apache king who stood like a guard set by the earth itself. His long black hair shifted with the wind, and the tribal jewelry resting against his chest caught the fading glow. He had the look of a man who carried many winters of responsibility on his back, a man who knew what loyalty, loss, danger, and sacrifice truly meant. Across from him stood the woman who had changed everything without even trying. She had arrived at the edge of his camp at sunrise, walking with quiet steps, dressed in a simple, fringed dress that flowed gently with every movement. Her hair, bright as new wheat, lifted in the breeze. Her face held a calm strength, but the kind that rose from deep hurt and deeper hope. No one knew how she had crossed the long miles alone, nor how she knew the secret paths that only the tribe used. The warriors had brought her before the king, expecting fear in her eyes. But she had looked at him directly, as if she'd been searching for him for a long time. The king studied her now, his expression unreadable as he asked in a steady voice what he had been repeating since morning. "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air like smoke rising from a quiet fire. It carried weight. It carried history. It carried memories of everything he had lost. The tribe expected him to send her away, to let the world outside deal with her. But something about her kept him from doing that. Maybe it was the determination in her gaze, or the way she stood, as if the wind itself supported her. She placed a hand gently on her stomach, a gesture so soft it unsettled him more than any threat. Then she answered, with a courage that felt almost unreal, "I want to carry your future within me." Those words stunned even the silent land around them. A rider in the distance paused his horse. A young guard who had been leaning against a wooden post straightened. Even the horses tied near the tents flicked their ears, sensing something had shifted. The king's jaw tightened, but not from anger. It was confusion, disbelief, and something else he had not felt in a long while. The woman's voice did not tremble. She seemed to know exactly what she was saying. And the king, for the first time in many seasons, did not know how to respond. Her words struck a wound within him that he thought was long buried. He had sworn to never bind his life with another. He had sworn to never trust the promise of tomorrow. But here she stood, stranger with nothing but a quiet heart and a truth she refused to hide. She did not look away from him. Not when he stepped closer. Not when he narrowed his eyes, as if trying to read every thought she held. Not even when the wind swept between them like a messenger trying to warn her to flee. She simply stood her ground, believing he deserved to know her story. Whether he accepted her or not, behind them, the desert carried traces of old battles, lonely trails, and memories that never faded. The Apache king carried every one of those memories within him. He had seen his people torn apart, seen his own path darkened by betrayal, and learned that anyone who came asking for a place in his world usually brought destruction with them. But this woman carried no weapon, no lies, no demands for protection or power, only the quiet words she had spoken. Her journey had not begun with bravery. It had begun with fear. There had been a night of heavy rain, a storm that turned the plains wild, and a choice that forced her to run for her life. She had left behind a place where she had never belonged. A place where her voice had been dismissed, her dreams ignored, and her heart pushed aside as if it were nothing. She had traveled miles with nothing but hope guiding her footsteps. Hope that the stories she had heard about the Apache king were true. Stories of a leader who protected the weak. Stories of a warrior who stood for honor. Stories of a man who still carried compassion, even when the world tried to take it from him. Yet standing in front of him now, she knew hope alone would not convince him. He was not a man who bent easily, nor someone who trusted without reason. His expression remained still as stone, though the storm inside his thoughts was clear. He wanted to know why she believed he was the answer to everything she carried in her heart. He wanted to know why she had chosen him instead of any safer, easier path. And he wanted to know what danger followed her, because no one walked across the desert alone unless they were running from something. The wind kicked up sand around their feet. The sky shifted to a darker shade, hinting that night was ready to claim the land. Fires were being lit around the camp. Drums echoed faintly in the distance. But the king did not move. Neither did she. He stepped closer until he could see the truth in her eyes. Not a trick. Not a hidden plan. Just a woman who stood in the middle of a world that had judged her and still found the strength to choose a future she believed in. You speak of a future, he said quietly, but you do not know my world. She placed her hand over his, surprising him with the warmth of her touch. Maybe your world is the only place where a future can grow, the king's breath caught, because those words pierced a part of him that had been cold for too long, and he hated that she could reach that place so easily. Before he could pull his hand away, she continued with a steadiness that left him silent. You asked what I want from you, she said. I want a place where my child can be safe, where I can stand beside someone who does not fear tomorrow, where trust is not something I have to beg for. He stared at her, torn between pushing her away and demanding she tell him everything she was hiding. The woman held her ground, her hand still resting on her stomach, protecting a life that may change both of their paths forever. The king finally spoke in a low voice. If you ask to stand in my world, then you must tell me the truth. Every piece of it. She took a breath, her eyes glistening with something deeper than fear. Then you should know, she whispered. Someone is coming for me, and they will not stop. The moment she said it, a shadow passed over the land, stretching toward their camp like a warning. The king turned his head sharply, sensing something approaching from the far dunes. Warriors lifted their spears. Horses stirred restlessly. The air grew tight, as if holding its breath. The woman stepped closer to him. This is why I came to you. Because only you can face what follows me. The king's hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his blade. Before he could ask another question, a distant rumble echoed across the plains. Something was coming, and it was coming fast. The ground trembled again, just enough for the sand at their feet to shift. The Apache king turned his body slightly in front of the woman without thinking. A silent shield formed out of instinct more than decision. His tribe stood on alert, each warrior scanning the horizon with sharp eyes, hands ready on spears and bows. A strange hush rolled over the camp as everyone sensed the same thing. Whatever approached was not a wandering traveler, not a tired herd, not a drifting storm. It carried weight, purpose, and danger. But before the threat came into view, the woman lowered her hand from her stomach and inhaled slowly, as if trying to gather enough air to speak the truth she had held back. The king watched her closely, noting the way her fingers shook for a moment before she steadied them. She had been brave since sunrise, never once flinching under the camp's suspicious stares. But now he saw something different. Not weakness, not fear. It was the heaviness of someone who had carried a burden alone for far too long. You said they are coming for you, the king murmured, his voice deep but quiet. You must tell me who they are. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon where the faint rumble still echoed. She looked as though she were watching memories rise from the desert itself. I was promised to a man back in the settlement, she said. A man with land, money, and a heart as hard as cold iron. He claimed I belonged to him because he paid for me. As if a woman's soul could be bought like a sack of grain? Her voice wavered slightly, then steadied. When I refused him, he said I would learn my place. He said no one turns their back on him. The king narrowed his eyes. He had seen that kind of man before, men who believed power gave them ownership over others. They were the type who crushed whatever stood in their way, who punished anything they could not control. She pulled at the fringe of her dress, clutching it as if trying to hold herself together. I did not want a life built on fear. I did not want a child raised under a man who saw control as love. Her voice softened to a whisper. So I ran. The king let her words sink into him. Running from a powerful man was dangerous enough. Running alone across the desert, wounded by cruelty and carrying new life, was something far beyond ordinary bravery. It was desperation mixed with a hope that still refused to die. The rumble grew louder. Warriors shifted their stance, ready. But the woman continued speaking, as though she understood that if she did not give the truth now, she might never get another chance. "He sent men after me," she said. "I heard them in the night when I slept near the river. I could see their torches when I hid behind the rocks. Tracked me by every footprint, every broken branch." She swallowed, remembering the fear. "I kept walking toward the stories I had heard, stories of the Apache king who protected those who could not protect themselves." He studied her face, searching for lies, tricks, or hidden motives. He found none. Only sincerity woven tightly with exhaustion. "What made you think my people would welcome you?" he asked. "I didn't know if they would," she admitted. "I only knew the world behind me offered no life at all, and the stories said you were a man of honor." She paused before adding, "I would rather take a chance with honor than return to a cage." The wind rose, brushing sand around their legs. The king's expression did not change outwardly, but something inside him shifted. Her words reminded him of promises he had once made to his own people, promises that had guided his rule through seasons of struggle and loss. He had protected widows, children, wounded travelers, abandoned souls who had no one else to stand for them. Yet now standing before him was a woman carrying both danger and hope, asking him to make a choice that could put his entire tribe at risk. He turned toward the horizon, watching the subtle cloud of dust that now lifted behind the distant shape moving toward them. The sand cloud was too high and too tight for a wandering animal. It was a group riding fast. "How many came after you?" he asked. She closed her eyes as if counting men in her mind. "At least 6 when I last saw them. Maybe more now. Here's other men who do not fear crossing long distances. Men who do not stop until they finish what they were paid to do." The king's jaw clenched. Men like that did not come to negotiate. They came to claim what they believed belonged to them, even if blood had to be spilled. But something still troubled him. "Why would a man chase you across so many miles?" he asked. "Why chase A woman who escaped him?" She lifted her hand once more to her stomach, giving him the unspoken answer before her words came. "Because he knows about the child. And he believes the child belongs to him." The king felt the ground beneath him shift, not from movement but from realization. The man was not just seeking revenge. He sought control over a life not his own. Maybe he believed possession would give him something to boast, something to claim his legacy. The woman's voice dropped to almost nothing. "He said he would take the child away from me to punish me. He said I should never have tried to choose my own path." The king felt a long, deep anger stir inside him, not directed at her, but at the cruelty she had endured. Pain, he understood. He understood. But this kind of selfish cruelty was something he had never tolerated. The cloud of dust on the horizon grew larger. The warriors exchanged sharp glances. Some shifted to block the woman, forming a protective arc, though they still watched her with mixed suspicion and concern. They did not know if she brought danger on purpose or by desperation, but they knew danger had found its way to their doorsteps. She looked at the king again, searching his face for any sign that she had made the right choice. "I know I brought trouble," she said softly, "but I had nowhere else to go." He stepped closer and lowered his voice so only she could hear him. "You asked to carry my future. But carrying my future is not just about a child. It is about standing with the people who live by loyalty and courage. It is about facing storms that do not stop with one night. If you stay here, you take on the burdens we carry. You walk into danger with us." "I am not afraid of that," she answered. "I am only afraid of going back to the life I ran from." The king watched her, noting the steadiness in her eyes. She did not waver. She did not look away. She did not plead. She simply stood as someone who had already lost too much and refused to lose what little she had left. The rumble on the horizon deepened into a thunder of hooves. Warriors readied their weapons. Horses snorted anxiously. Children were ushered into the larger tents. Elders stepped aside, trusting the younger warriors to guard the camp. The sky darkened further as night crept across the plains, wrapping everything in a tense cloak. The king lifted one hand, signaling his men to prepare, but not act too soon. He knew he had only moments before he would have to make a choice that might decide the fate of everyone present. The woman's breath quickened. "If you turn me away now, they will reach me before I cross the far ridge." The king did not answer. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on the approaching riders, watching their formation, counting their numbers, reading their pace. He had fought enough battles to know these were not weary travelers. They rode with a purpose as sharp as a blade. Behind him, the woman's voice trembled for the first time since she arrived. "Please, I cannot protect my child alone." Her words struck him like an arrow, hitting the place where he kept the memories he never spoke aloud. Memories of what he had lost long ago. Memories of the family he once hoped to build. Memories that had driven him to become the man he was now. He finally turned to her, eyes dark with something she could not decipher. "You came asking to stand beside me," he said. "To carry a future that ties your life to mine." She nodded, barely breathing. He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Then you must understand this. If I choose to stand for you now, I stand against the men who chase you. I do not stand halfway." Her heart pounded in her chest. She swallowed hard. "I understand." The riders were close enough now that their forms grew clear. Dust rose around them like a storm, their silhouettes cut sharp against the fading sky. The king's warriors shifted, ready to charge. The woman clutched her stomach, her fear swallowed by a deeper instinct to protect. The king took one long breath, then lifted his spear. But before he could give the command, something unexpected happened. One of the riders broke formation and raised a white cloth high into the air. A signal for talk, or a trick. The king's grip tightened. The camp held its breath, and the desert waited to see what choice he would make next. The rider holding the white cloth slowed his horse as he neared the edge of the Apache camp, the dust swirling around him like a warning. The king did not lower his spear. His warriors stood in a tight formation, their bodies tense and ready, their weapons lifted but not released. The desert wind pressed against them, carrying the thick scent of danger mixed with the dryness of the evening air. Every pair of eyes watched that lone rider, waiting to see whether this was a peaceful signal or a trick meant to distract them. The woman stayed behind the king, her fingers pressed lightly against her stomach, feeling the weight of everything she had brought with her. She had expected the men chasing her to arrive, but she had not expected them to show even a trace of diplomacy. The white cloth meant talk, yet she knew the kind of men they were. Talking was rarely anything more than a delay before violence. The king stepped forward just enough to show authority without stepping into the open. His voice traveled steady and sharp. "State your purpose." The rider pulled his horse to a stop. He was a man in his middle years, with a long coat that whipped behind him in the wind. His hat was pulled low, but even from a distance, the cold confidence in his posture gave away his nature. He glanced toward the woman for a heartbeat, then refocused on the king. "We've come for what is ours," the man said calmly. "Hand her over, and no blood needs to be spilled today." The words cut through the air like a blade. The woman's breath caught, but the king didn't so much as shift. He studied the man carefully, his eyes reading every detail. The rider's tone held. No fear, no hesitation. Men like him were used to getting what they wanted by force, not by respect. The king could see the outline of other riders behind him, waiting for a signal. 6, at least. Maybe more hiding in the haze. "She belongs to no one," the king answered, voice firm. A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face. "You don't know the situation," she was promised. "She ran away with something that doesn't belong to her." That statement made the warriors mutter under their breath. The king felt the woman tense behind him. Her voice came low, barely audible. "He's lying." The rider kept his eyes fixed on the king. "We'll make this easy. Hand her over. You keep your camp safe. We leave without trouble." The king tilted his head slightly. "And if I don't?" The man smiled faintly, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Then trouble stays." The wind whipped the white cloth violently, as if trying to warn them that peace was only a thin mask stretched across a storm. The rider's horse snorted and pawed the ground, eager and nervous. Behind him, a second rider shifted, his hand resting too close to the butt of his rifle. It was enough for the Apache warriors to tighten their stance, but before the king could speak again, A young Apache scout rode up from the opposite side of the camp. His breath came sharp and quick as he slid off his horse and bowed slightly. "I tracked their trail beyond the far ridge," the scout said quietly. "There are more men behind them. At least 8. They stayed hidden when these approached." The rider with the white cloth heard it. His smirk widened, not in victory, but in the confidence of a man who believed the outcome was already decided. "See," he said, "we're prepared. You don't want this fight." The king did not blink. "If you came seeking peace, you would have approached with open hands. Instead, you hide men behind the ridge." The rider shrugged. "Mountains have shadows. We use them." The tension in the air thickened, stretching like a wire pulled too tight. The woman could barely breathe. She knew this man. She had seen the cruelty behind his calm words. She had watched him drag innocent people through fear just to prove a point. He was not here for negotiation. He was here to reclaim ownership, to make an example of her. The child she carried was simply his excuse. The king lowered his spear slightly, not in surrender, but to show he intended to talk before deciding anything. "If the woman speaks the truth," he said, "she fled because she feared for her life. If your claim is false, then you have no right to demand anything here." The rider's eyes darkened. "She's got you fooled. She lies well. Always did." The woman felt heat rise in her chest. "I never lied," she said, stepping forward. "Not once. You're the one who twisted everything to suit your needs." Her voice trembled, but her words held strength. The rider's eyes cut toward her. "You ran from the life that was made for you," he said. "You should have been grateful. And now look at you, hiding behind a tribe that has no reason to protect you." The king's jaw clenched at the man's tone. The woman stepped closer to the king without realizing it. As if the air between them instinctively pushed her toward safety, the rider leaned slightly forward on his saddle. "I will say this once more. Hand her over." The king lifted his spear again in a smooth motion. "You are not in a position to command me." The rider held the king's gaze for a long moment. Then he lowered the white cloth and tucked it beneath his saddle. It was no longer conversation. The king's warriors tightened their formation. Every bow rose. Every spear tilted forward. Every breath in the desert turned still. But instead of attacking, the rider nudged his horse backward. "We'll return at dawn," he said, "with all our men. There will be no talking then, only taking." He glanced toward the woman. "You'll come willingly, or we'll take what's ours by force. Either way, this ends tomorrow." He turned and rode away, the other riders pulling back with him. The dust cloud followed them like a snarling creature eager for daylight. The woman exhaled shakily. The king did not look at her yet. His eyes stayed locked on the retreating riders until they were no more than shadows against the darkening sky. When the last trace of dust settled, he finally turned toward her. "You said nothing about this man having so many men." Her voice shook. "I didn't know he would gather more. I thought he sent only the few who chased me at first." The king did not accuse her, but she could feel the weight of what hung between them. This was no small threat. This was a conflict that could spill far beyond her past. Before he could speak again, an older warrior approached. His face bore lines carved by age and battles long past. "We must prepare," he said. "If they return at dawn, we cannot rely on words." Others joined, forming a circle around the king. Voices rose in concern. Some argued that taking in the woman placed the whole tribe at risk. Others said abandoning her would stain the tribe's honor. A few believed there was more to her story, something even she had not yet told. The woman listened, her heart sinking with each fearful whisper. She had not meant to bring this danger. She had only wanted safety for herself and her unborn child. Now she feared she had brought the storm straight into the heart of their home. The king raised his hand, and silence fell. "We will not abandon her," he said firmly. "But we must know everything before dawn." His eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. "There is more you haven't told me." She swallowed. "Yes," she whispered. The wind pressed against the camp, carrying the quiet steps of night. Fires flickered to life. Children huddled in their tents. Warriors sharpened blades and checked arrows, and the woman knew she could no longer hold back. The truth that tied her fate to this man and his tribe. She looked at the king, her voice low and full of the fear she had carried for too long. "There's something about the child," she said. The king's expression hardened. Around them, even the night seemed to pause, and she knew that once she said the next words, nothing in their world would ever be the same. The woman stood in the center of the firelit circle, her hands trembling as she held them close to her stomach. The Apache king watched her with steady eyes, waiting for the truth she had been holding back. The camp had gone silent around them. Even the wind seemed to draw away, leaving only the crackling of flames and the quiet breathing of warriors who knew that every word spoken next would shape what awaited them at dawn. She took a slow breath, gathering strength. "The child," she whispered, "is not his. It never was." The words hit the air with a force she couldn't take back. The king's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. The warriors murmured among themselves, some confused, others surprised, but she kept speaking. Because silence now would build walls she could never climb. "He claimed the child so he could claim me," she said, "to bind me to him, to make sure I had no path to walk but the one he chose." Her voice wavered with old pain. "When I refused, he said no woman under his roof would carry a child unless he wanted it. He said he would take the baby from me and send me where women go when they stop obeying." Her breath shook at the memory. The king's jaw tightened, anger rising like a dark wave behind his calm exterior. He had seen men like that before. Men who built their power through fear, men who broke the spirits of those around them just to feel strong. She lifted her eyes to meet his. "I ran to save my child, not myself." The king stepped closer, shadows from the fire sliding across the lines of his face. "Then who is the father?" he asked. Her eyes softened with something heavy and unspoken. "I don't know. I never knew him. He was a traveler who helped me one night when I was in danger. He left before I even learned his name. But he was kind, and he meant me no harm." That night changed everything. The warriors exchanged uneasy glances. The king studied her, not with judgment, but with clarity. He could sense no deceit in her voice, only truth woven from hardship and survival. But there was more. Her shoulders slumped as she whispered, "He said no other man would ever want a woman like me, that no tribe would accept a child with an unknown father, that no kingdom or camp would ever take me in." Ash. Her voice lowered again. "He said only he could give my child a life. But what he meant was that he would take everything I had left." The king's eyes darkened at the cruelty of those words. He had sworn long ago that children, no matter their blood, were gifts to be protected. He had sworn that no woman under his watch would be treated as a possession. Her story struck him somewhere deep, stirring old memories that once burned but had long been buried. Before he could speak, the young scout returned from the ridge with a face full of alarm. "They have set up camp not far from ours," he said. "More men arrived, at least a dozen now. They carry rifles and supplies. They're preparing for dawn." The tension thickened like smoke. Warriors stiffened. Mothers pulled their children deeper into the tents. Elders prayed quietly beneath their breath. Dawn would bring war. The woman's eyes widened with fear as she tried to hide. "They won't stop," she murmured. "He would rather destroy everything in his path than let me go." The king finally spoke in a voice strong enough to steady the ground beneath her feet. "Let him come. You are under my protection now." But inside, the king felt the weight of his choice. Protecting her meant risking the tribe. Not protecting her meant breaking everything he stood for. It was not simply about one woman. It was about honor, truth, and the future she carried. He ordered the warriors to prepare. The camp shifted into quiet action. Horses were secured, weapons checked. Fires kept low to avoid revealing too much. Children were moved toward the inner circle where elders would guard them. The woman stood near the king, watching the preparations with a heart full of guilt. "I never wanted to bring danger to your people," she said softly. He turned to her, his eyes warm but firm. Danger comes whether we choose it or not. What matters is what we do when it finds us." His words settled something in her chest, a strength she thought she had lost. As night deepened, the camp held its breath under the growing threat. The drums did not sound. The usual songs of the evening were silent. Instead, the only sound was the sharpening of blades and the whisper of prayers carried on the wind. The king walked the perimeter of the camp, inspecting every guard post. The moon cast silver over the land, outlining the distant campfires of the approaching men. He studied their placement, their numbers, their confidence. They believed they would win simply because they had more men. But they did not know the land, the winds, the shadows, or the resolve of the people they were threatening. When he returned, he found the woman seated near a dim fire, her hands folded protectively around her stomach. She looked up as he approached. "I don't know if any place in this world will accept me and my child," she said quietly, "but I had to try." The king crouched beside her. His presence alone carried safety like a cloak. "You came to the right place," he said. "This land does not belong to the man who hunts you. It is not his right to tear families apart or decide the worth of a child." She felt tears gather, though she held them back. "You speak as if the child already has a place here." He didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward the distant fires. There was a long moment where neither spoke, as if both were listening to the heartbeat of the land. When he finally looked at her again, his voice carried a depth she hadn't expected. "A child is not judged by the past, only by what they grow to become." Something warm settled inside her, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Before she could speak, a sudden whistle cut through the night. A warning signal from the northern guard post. The king rose fast, already reaching for his weapon. Warriors rushed to their positions. The woman stood, her heart thundering inside her. A shadow moved at the ridgeline, then another. Men creeping closer under the cloak of night, hoping to catch the tribe unprepared. The king signaled silently to his warriors, who shifted into formation with practiced ease. The approaching men paused when they saw the silhouettes of Apache guards already waiting. They had expected weakness. Instead, they found readiness. The tension rose higher than ever. The bowstring pulled to its limit. The woman clutched her stomach, terrified of what might happen if violence erupted before dawn. The king stood tall, spear in hand, watching every movement in the darkness. The leader of the group stepped forward. Even in the moonlight, the woman recognized him. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. It was the same man who had smiled so calmly earlier. The same man who had promised to return at dawn. He had come early, hoping to strike in the darkness. He raised a hand, signaling his men to slow. "I see you're ready for us," he called out. "Good. Saves us time." The king stepped forward, his voice hard as stone. "If you attack in the night, you attack cowards." The man laughed softly. "Cowards win battles too." The warriors around the king stiffened, ready to launch at the slightest signal. The woman felt her pulse pounding in her ears. The night air grew so heavy, it felt like the whole desert was watching. The man gestured toward her. "You can still choose the easy way. Hand her over, and I'll spare the tribe." The king didn't blink. "Your threats mean nothing." The man's smile faded. His voice dropped into something far uglier. "Then tomorrow, this place burns." The king raised his spear in answer. "Then tomorrow, we fight." The man glared at him for one long moment before turning away. His men followed into the dark, their silhouettes fading back toward their camp. The night grew silent again, but the fear remained thick and alive. The woman stepped closer to the king, her voice shaking. "They'll come with everything they have," he nodded. "So will we." She pressed a trembling hand to her stomach. "What if they reach me? What if they take the child?" His eyes locked onto hers, steady and unbroken. "They won't," he said, "because you are not facing this alone." The wind swept across the plains again, carrying the scent of battle, waiting for sunrise. And as dawn crept closer, the desert held its breath, knowing that the moment of choice and war was approaching like a storm no one could outrun. The first color of dawn crawled slowly over the horizon, brushing pale gold across the desert sands. The Apache camp stood silent and steady, every warrior in position, every bow drawn, every horse prepared. The king stood at the very front, a tall shadow against the lifting light. His presence alone steadied the hearts of his people. Even as the weight of the coming clash pressed against them like a tightening storm, the woman stood behind him among the elders and children, though she refused to hide in fear. Her hands rested on her stomach, feeling the quiet movements of the child within her. She whispered a promise under her breath, a promise that this child would never know the cruelty she had fled. The king's final words the night before echoed inside her, giving strength to every breath she drew. She was not alone anymore. She did not have to face darkness without a shield. And the tribe she feared would judge her had instead offered protection and dignity. Her heart carried both hope and fear as the moment of truth approached. The rumble of hooves shook the ground as the group of men approached. Dust lifted behind them like a rising wave. The leader rode at the front, his expression sharp with determination and pride. Behind him were the men he had gathered, armed with rifles and ropes, convinced they would take back what they believed belonged to them. They rode with the confidence of men who had lived their whole lives forcing their will upon others. But when they reached the far edge of the Apache camp, they found a sight they had not expected. Warriors stood ready in tight formation. Scouts lined the ridges. Archers watched from hidden spots. Horses pawed at the earth, ready to charge. The king alone stepped forward, placing himself between his people and the danger that approached. The leader slowed his horse, though he kept his chin lifted as if he still believed victory was in his hands. "Last chance," he called out. "Bring her to me." The king held his spear steady. "You will leave these lands. You will leave her in peace. You have no claim here." The man scoffed. "Everything comes with a claim. She ran from a life that belonged to her. I won't let a tribe hide what I paid for." The king took a step closer, his voice carrying across the sand. "A woman cannot be bought. A child cannot belong to a man who has no heart, and this land will not bow to your cruelty." Anger flashed across the man's face. He pulled out his rifle, raising it toward the king. The warriors tightened their grip on their weapons, ready to charge in an instant. The woman gasped, her heart seizing in fear as she saw the danger pointed at the king. The leader pulled the trigger, but the king moved with the speed of a seasoned warrior. His spear struck the rifle upward, making the bullet explode harmlessly into the sky. The sound echoed across the plains, unleashing a roar of battle cries from every Apache warrior. The men who had come to reclaim the woman tried to fight, but they were not fighting frightened settlers. They were facing warriors who knew the land, knew the wind, knew each shadow and sound. The battle was swift and fierce. The leader tried to reload his rifle, but the king lunged forward, knocking him off his horse. They wrestled in the sand, each blow sending dust flying. The woman watched with her heart pounding, clutching her stomach as if her fear could protect the child. The king's strength overpowered the man, pinning him to the ground. "This ends now," the king growled. The man spat back. "You think you can keep her? You think you can give her a life? Her child will never belong here. She will never belong here." The king's eyes burned with a quiet fire. "She already does." The man tried to reach for his knife, but the king struck it away and held him still until the fight drained out of him. Around them, the other men surrendered, realizing they were outmatched. The Apache warriors disarmed them and gathered their weapons into a pile. The king stood tall and forced the leader to his feet. "You will go back the way you came," he said. "Tell anyone who listens that this land does not bow to cruelty. Tell them that honor still lives here." The leader glared, but he knew he had lost. His pride was bruised, but his life had been spared, which was more kindness than he would ever offer someone else. He called to his defeated men, and they mounted their horses again. They rode away slowly, beaten but alive, leaving the desert to its rightful guardians. When they disappeared over the far ridge, camp let out long breaths of relief. Warriors lowered their weapons. Mothers embraced their children. Elders gave thanks for the sun rising over a land that had been protected. The woman stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the king. The adrenaline that carried him through the battle slowly faded. But he stood tall, his chest rising and falling from the fight. She approached him, her hands trembling. Not from fear, but from the swell of emotion she could no longer hold back. "You kept your promise," she whispered. He looked at her gently. Sometimes promises are the only thing that keep darkness away. Warriors and families gathered around them, offering respect to the woman who had brought both danger and a deeper purpose into their lives. She felt a warmth in their presence, a sense of belonging she had never known. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to cry. Tears slid down her cheeks, falling not from fear, but from relief, gratitude, and the strange hope forming quietly in her soul. The king stepped closer, placing a protective hand over hers on her stomach. "Your child is safe now," he said. "No one will take that away." Her breath caught. "I thought no place in this world would welcome us. I thought no one would care enough to fight for us." "Hey?" He shook his head slowly. "A child is never a burden, and you came to us with truth in your voice and courage in your heart. That alone gives you a place here." The tribe gathered around them, forming a circle as the sun rose higher. The elders approached the woman, touching her shoulder gently. "You have strength," one said, "and strength is needed to raise new life in this world," another elder added. "The child will bring new beginnings, not just for you, but for our tribe." Her eyes watered again. She had never expected acceptance, let alone warmth. Yet here she stood, surrounded by people who did not judge her past, who did not question her worth, who did not see her child as a burden. Instead, they saw hope. The king looked at her with steady kindness. "If you choose to stay here," he said, "you will not walk alone. You will have a family. You will have a home. And when the time comes, your child will be part of a tribe that lives by honor." She nodded slowly, her heart full. "I want that," she whispered. "More than anything." The king offered his hand. She placed hers into it without hesitation. The tribe's people cheered softly, a sound full of blessing and welcome. As the day unfolded, the camp returned to life. Fires were rekindled for breakfast. Children ran around laughing, relieved that the danger had passed. Warriors cleaned their weapons and shared proud stories of their bravery. The land seemed lighter, as if the desert itself approved of what had been decided. The woman walked through the camp beside the king, feeling the weight of her fear finally slip away. For the first time in her life, she felt her future open like a wide plain stretching toward endless horizons. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with colors of warmth, the king stood beside her near the edge of the camp. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. His hand rested over hers, gently covering the child they both now protected. "You came here asking for a future," he said quietly. "Now you have one." She looked up at him, her eyes full of peace. "Not just a future," she said. "A family." The wind brushed softly over them, warm and full of promise. The desert no longer felt empty. It felt alive, full of beginnings instead of endings. And as night settled gently over the land, the Apache king and the woman stood together, knowing their paths had joined not by chance but by courage, trust, and a promise made stronger than any fear. The story closed not on the struggles behind them, but on the hope ahead, where love, honor, and a new life would grow.